Faith versus Culture. We're talking to recording artist Leanna Crawford about faith in the spotlight and how the faithfulness of a family member made a huge impact on her life. That's coming up.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. I'm Goins-Phillips, joined by my CBN News colleague, Billy Hallowell. Billy, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. And it's good to have our guest today, singer-songwriter Leanna Crawford. Leanna, thank you so much for being here with us. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So for people who might not be familiar with your story, you've got a new album, Still Waters. It's your debut album coming out. But before we talk about the songs on that album, tell us a little bit about your faith journey. How is it that you came to Christ and then ultimately decided to become a Christian artist?
Yeah, I actually grew up in a Jesus-loving home. And so my parents love the Lord, and I'm super grateful because I knew him from a young age. And I love to tell a story that I was 4 years old. And I remember I asked my parents that I was I want to ask Jesus into my heart. And I do remember that. It was a very special moment for me at 4. I just felt like I knew him. But of course, I kept growing up and kept learning about the Lord. But I feel and I'd love to share this too. I feel there's so many different moments in my life, and I feel for a lot of people too, where all of a sudden you just have a moment where you just feel the Lord meets you, and I'm super grateful because I feel he's done that so many times. And so another moment for me was when I was in high school, and I decided to get baptized. And I remember we were at high school camp and we could do it in the river, and it was the very end of camp. Everybody got baptized, and I was writing my testimony down, and I was so overwhelmed by his love that I was just in tears. But I remember that baptism, I forgot to call my parents and tell them I was getting baptized, so they didn't come. And they were we would have loved to be there, but I just totally forgot until the morning of, and I was I'm getting baptized today, and they were oh my word. So very special. My sister was with my pastor, she helped baptize me. It was still really special. But just significant moments, that was just I was so overwhelmed by his love. But then I feel throughout my life, and even as I've just continued to get to know him more, I feel he's just continued to be so faithful and kind, and I'm very grateful for that. There's a few different moments where I was I think music is something that I want to do. I always loved music. I was super annoying as a child, though. I was always singing all the time, and I was just singing around the house, making up songs. And I just wanted, I want everybody to hear, I just loved it. But it wasn't even that. I just I loved singing. And then I started to kind of write songs. And I remember the first song that I really sat down and wrote was another one of those significant moments that my youth group, we went down to, it was called a harvest crusade, but we went, there was 15 of us. And I remember we were sitting way up high in the rafters of Key Arena. It was we were way up. And so I had this perfect vantage point when he did the altar call. And I just was able to watch as thousands of people flooded the floor, just lifting their hands and praising and crying out. And I just sat down, and I was 15 at the time, but it just broke me down in tears. And I was how beautiful is the Lord and his love for us. And so I went home that night, and I picked up my brother's guitar, and I started just playing 2 chords that I thought were cool. They weren't even really chords. I didn't know what I was doing. And I wrote my first song. And so that kind of started the journey of I would write when I was moved or impacted or processing, and just fell in love with it. And it was something I really wanted to do, but had no idea how to do it. No one did music in my small town. And so through a series of a lot of different things, and God being so kind, he opened the door for me to come to Nashville a few years later. And I ended up moving to Nashville 6 years ago, which is where I'm based now. But I've been able to go on the road and write and share those songs, and I'm really, really grateful to do that.
Yeah, when you think about the music you have out now and this album, what is your biggest hope for the impact, not only of the album itself, but maybe some of the individual songs that mean something deep to you?
Yeah, I think overall my prayer for the album is like whoever hears it, my prayer is that the listener would feel like seen. They wouldn't feel so alone. And then I think overall too, I really had a lot of fun making the track list. There's like 14 songs on the album. So I had fun kind of making the order of the track list, but I'm like praying like for peace for whoever hears the album, just because I think we could all use some of that. But like the album starts with a song called For Heaven's Sake, which I feel like is a timely song for right now, and just that we're all the same at the foot of the cross. Like we're, no one's, better, or like we're just all the same. And then it ends on a song called Rest. And the bridge of that song is just come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. That incredible promise that he has for us. And so I think just kind of like starting and ending there, but of course, lots of songs in between. The title track, Stillwater, Psalm 23, is super special to me as well. But I think that's like the beautiful thing that I love about music, and I love about making music about the Lord. I love making it. Just, I feel like there's an element of hope that I get to share and write about. And I think also like I'm writing my story, I'm writing a lot of my experience, but I think that's like the beautiful thing about songwriting and music is that when I'm listening to a song, sometimes I'll be like, oh, I hear my story. It's like, how did they know I was going through that? And if people can hear that in these songs, I think that's beautiful.
I was reading a little bit about some of your story before we got on here to talk, and something that I think is really fascinating and really just an incredible aspect of your story is your great aunt, and the fact that she started to go blind and then decided to memorize scripture, and really she played a pivotal role in your family's journey to relationships with Jesus. Talk a little bit about that, because I know some of her story influenced some of your songwriting for this album too.
Yeah, for sure. She was just a beautiful, beautiful woman. She led my mom to Jesus when my mom was 7. And then later, when my parents started dating, my dad came to know Jesus a little bit later in life when he was in college. And as he was kind of working through and processing that, he remembers my great aunt Maureen just like sitting on the floor and just talking to him, like not talking down to him, just like having, and he was just so like, oh wow, like this is beautiful. And so that was really sweet for him. So both of my parents talked about my great aunt Maureen all my childhood, and how wonderful she was. And we were on the West Coast and she was on the East Coast in Pennsylvania. And so I hadn't got to meet her. And I finally got to meet her when I was in middle school, and we made a trip out and we got to spend a few hours with her. And it was very, very impactful. And I still remember that time with her, and I was just like in middle school, but her just like her joy and her love for the Lord was so beautiful. And I met her when she was like 103, and she was just amazing, but she was still just full of life and love for the Lord. And it was very, very beautiful. And I remember I even tested, I was like, do you really know the whole Bible? And I was like, my sister and I were like, okay, we're reading along as we're calling out different chapters, and she's just saying it. And it was so beautiful. And she was still ministering to people in her hundreds. We spent a few hours with her, and while we were with her, several people called her and asked for prayer. I was like, and she prayed over them. It was beautiful. So I think even getting to share her story, her legacy, and a generational faith of just showing what loving Jesus means and showing that to people is really, really beautiful. And so she definitely impacted me for sure in my songwriting, and especially my song Stillwater. So it's been super special to share her story.
Mm. Yeah, it's incredible to hear and a good reminder of the importance of obedience, right? Because her obedience really is what led to y'all coming to know Christ as a family. So what a beautiful testimony she has and your family has because of it. There's a lot more to talk about, but we're going to fit in a quick break right now. So everybody stick with us. We'll be right back with more Faith versus Culture. Well, welcome back to Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. We are joined by Leanna Crawford. Leanna, one thing I want to ask you about is your marriage to NBA center Cody Zeller. Talk a little bit about that. How did y'all meet each other? How did that relationship come about? Because your wedding was featured in People magazine, so you went from moving to Nashville, or starting your career as an artist, to now you're on People magazine. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, super thankful. We're coming up on our year anniversary, which is crazy, and I'm super grateful. We actually met, so I moved to Nashville like beginning of 2018, and we met in 2018 originally at a concert. He was playing for the Charlotte Hornets at the time, and I was opening for an artist, and we were playing outside of Charlotte. So I was opening for an artist that he was friends with, Cody was friends with. So they had hung out that day, and I remember like meeting him on the bus, and we were just kind of like, I was like, cool, he seems like a nice guy, but like I don't, he's a basketball player. Like we would have nothing in common, and I didn't know. Like I was like, yeah, cool. And then a couple years later, we had kind of like, we followed each other on Instagram, and he would like message me and say like, happy birthday or Merry Christmas, but like nothing beyond that. Like we were just like, it's cool. And then during COVID, right at the beginning of COVID, I was, pretty much everything had been canceled. I was like making no money. I was just trying to do anything, play songs, do anything. And I was leading worship kind of summertime, summer of 2020. I was leading worship for a camp outside of Charlotte, and my mom and my sister were like, hey, you should message Cody, because we knew he was in Charlotte still, and tell him to come hang out with you. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's super weird. I'm not going to like message him. And then I was like, well, let me just look on Instagram. And I looked on Instagram, and he had messaged me 3 months before, and I had left him on red, and I totally forgot. Like I had opened it and meant to respond. I never responded. So I messaged him, and I was like, hey, sorry I never responded to this message, but do you want to come hang out with me at this camp? And a bunch of kids. So he did. And we had the best time, and he was super sweet. He's like, it was a camp it was a bunch of kids, and so they all loved him. We're very excited that he was at camp, but he was so gracious and so sweet. And we went on a hike that day, and we had the best time. We were like laughing, and he asked all these questions, and I was like, oh wow, like he's so sweet. And then the end of the night, he was like, well, I'll come back tomorrow. And I was like, okay. And he just like kept coming back to the camp. And then we started dating that summer, and it's just been so sweet. I've learned a lot about basketball. I didn't know anything about basketball before we started dating. Like literally I could name 3 NBA players. I watched like my brother's high school basketball, and that was like it. I didn't really, I was like, I don't know. Now it's so much fun. Obviously, I love watching him play. I love watching his games. And I can name more than 3 NBA players, which is good. But it's been
that's 3 more NBA players than I can name. So other than Cody, I can name Cody now.
Hey, yeah, Cody. Yeah, Cody. There you go. Cody's no, really, but it's been so fun, and he loves music, and that's been sweet too. So we've kind of learned a lot about each other's careers, and he's so sweet, and he's so much fun. So I'm so grateful.
What is it like building up, God honoring marriage in a culture where people aren't getting married, where that sort of thing isn't really honored? And here you guys are, you've come together and you're building that up.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, especially in in the NBA world, everything, it's just a different culture as well. I'm very thankful. We were on like the same page from day one, and we like talked pretty early on too. Like we were very we had so much fun while we were dating, but we were pretty serious about like we're not like, the goal for us getting to know each other and dating is that we're, if we're we're going to keep dating, then we want to get married. And then if not, then like, if this doesn't work out, that's fine. But like, we were pretty serious about that. And, I like had this thing that was like kind of it's a very unique thing and kind of like very serious and intense, but, we had only like hung out. We weren't even officially dating for like a few weeks. And I decided that I really liked him and I knew that he liked me. But he's like pretty shy, but I was like, okay, if you want to keep, hanging out, like dating me, then you need to call my dad and you need to ask permission. And I'm not like, in high school or even college. It's like, I'm in my mid-20s. And I was like, you need to like call him and ask permission. And he was like, okay, like he was super sweet about it. And so he called my dad, and I didn't warn Cody at all about what this phone call would be. But it's like my dad asked like very intense questions. Like what are your, like it's a long list. But just I was kind of like, I wanted to be, I wanted Cody to be, like afraid of my father. I was like, you need to have the fear of God and the fear of my father. And so it ended up being like a 30-minute phone call. And I didn't know this at the time, but Cody sent a picture to his brother. And after the phone call, and he had like sweated through his t-shirt, like he was just like sweating after the phone call with my father, which is good. And my dad loves him. They love each other. It's all good. But I just definitely wanted to start it off. I was like, this is gonna be so fun dating you, but like we need to start off on like, this is how I want to do it different. And not everybody has like a dad that's going to do that or even feel comfortable doing that. But even so, I was like, I want you to know like my worth. And he did for sure. But those questions are like, they're like pretty intense. Like my dad has a long list. And so it was good, I think, starting off that way. And we just had lots of conversations about how we were going to date and try to, do the best we could in that and really honor each other in that. And I'm super thankful because he just like, he was so fantastic the whole time. So I'm really grateful. We had a lot of fun too.
For people who are in their teens or in their 20s who are just on the front end of what you're now in as someone who's married, talk a little bit about your decision, you and Cody's decision to pursue a gospel-focused marriage in the spotlight, because it's difficult enough in our culture to put Christ first and to keep the gospel central to our way of life. But then when you add the pressure of the spotlight and being an NBA star and being a recording artist and then being in People magazine, and there's all of this attention on you, talk a little bit about how you've been able as a couple to put that discipline in place to keep Christ first and to keep the gospel central when the world is kind of pulling at you in every which direction.
Yeah, I think we've done, we were long distance most of our dating relationship. And then even some of our marriage, we've been apart because we both travel. So it's so funny. We have like a little routine that we do. It's like very simple, but every night, like we would FaceTime and we play this little card game online while we FaceTime called Cribbage. It's like my family card game and it's an old person game, but it's like the best. Anyway, so we play that and then we would pray and we take turns praying every night and just like praying over each other and over our relationship and now like over our marriage. And we try to do that when we're together as well. But I think it's just like building each other up and trying to like speak life and always just like praying over each other, I think has been like huge for us. And so just like a ton of prayer. I'm really grateful because Cody, he leads really well and he's an incredible leader, but he's definitely like, he's a very like steady person and like personality, and he's just someone of very high character. And so, like there's a really neat thing in the NBA, but an hour before tip off, they do chapel. All 30 teams do it, and they have a pastor. Every team has a different chaplain, and they give like a 10-minute like devotional. And so Cody goes like at 60 minutes before tip off, and there's other guys in there, and they just have like a time of devotion and prayer, which I think is just like really neat. Sometimes Cody's like inviting his friends, and sometimes he's like the only one there. But I think that's really helped keep him grounded, especially like in that piece. and in what he does too. But he's led really well, and I'm very grateful for that. But I think it's also just like figuring out as we go. I think the world is so wild, and I think we're still learning, and we're very much just like, trying to figure out. But I think that praying every night, we don't do it like every night, but we try to do it every night, has really helped like keep us like grounded in faith, and that's been huge for us.
Yeah, for sure. I think prayer is so important to the life of the Christian. Well, the album is called Still Waters. Leanna Crawford, thank you so much for joining us. And by the way, you can get the album wherever you listen to music now. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody, stick with us. We'll be right back with more Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture. I'm here with Billy Hallowell. Billy, I think what's so encouraging about these conversations is just really what Leanna was saying, is about the importance of putting Christ first, about the importance of prayer. And when we see somebody who has a platform, regardless of what size it is, it could be somebody with a huge platform or somebody with a small platform. What I was saying is it's difficult to live a Christian life regardless. So it's important to see people who do have that spotlight on them living out their faith in a God-honoring way, because it reminds us that we are all called to do that and are all capable of doing that in whatever situation we're in or whatever sphere of influence we have.
Well, yeah, and you never know who you're going to influence, right? Her great aunt was out there having this incredible influence over her entire family, this generational influence, and other people as well. And, that story, I'd love to spend an hour talking about that woman, because that's a person who didn't have this massive platform, but her platform was the people in her family. And now she has, a great niece who's gone on to be, a singer and is having, it's sort of that snowball effect. And so it's pretty incredible to see people like that and hear stories of people who have just had that generational impact on their family.
There was so much there, and it was great to talk with Leanna about some of her story. But everybody stick with us, and we'll be right back to wrap up this week's episode of Faith versus Culture. That is all the time we have for this week's episode of Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want more, head on over to cbnnews.com. You can subscribe there to our Quick Start newsletter, never miss any news of the day, and also check out our daily Quick Start podcast. It comes out every weekday morning, and you can hear all of the news from a gospel perspective. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and God bless you.